Hey there, everyone. Welcome back to Utility Sports. Really excited for this video on following the 2023 NBA Draft Lottery. We now have a great idea of where these teams are going to be selecting. It kind of reshapes this offseason, what we could potentially see from some of these organizations. And I think Portland's really one of those teams that drew my attention immediately during the NBA Draft Lottery when they landed the third overall pick, of course, one ping pong ball away from the first overall selection, which would have completely changed the landscape of the NBA. But now they find themselves selecting third overall. It's not a bad draft class to be picking third overall, but we have heard Damian Lillard put a little bit of pressure on the organization to not just draft a young player to continue building for the future. He wants to win, and he's been very loyal to Portland, but I think that loyalty, not necessarily that it's running out, but it does have some limits. And I think he doesn't want to sit through a complete and total retool while he's in his early to mid 30s. He wants to be competing for championships and deep postseason runs, and it's tough to do that while you have a very young team. So Portland's in a spot where maybe they would look to trade the third overall pick, which is exactly what we're going to look to do in this video. Really excited for this one. If you do enjoy, make sure to leave a like, subscribe to the channel for more, hit that notification bell, and let's jump into a video preview here where we look at not one, not two, not three, but four trades centered around the third overall pick for the Portland Trail Blazers. Of course, looking to add in proven NBA ready veteran talent that can make a high impact for this team next year. And some of my key points of emphasis for Portland in this video was, one, they're not trading Dame. Secondly, they're not trading Anthony Simons, and they're not trading Shaedon Sharpe. Those were the key pieces for me. This is also under the expectation that Jeremy Grant would return to the organization. But then the question for me is, now, would I actually trade the pick? The answer to that is no. I think Portland's better off keeping the pick and building long-term. But again, there is that kind of internal pressure from Damian Lillard, which brings us to a real fork in the road for Portland. Do they go this way or that way? And what I mean by that is Damian Lillard is the way that this franchise has been running. They've been going through him, and he's been a fantastic piece for them to continue building around. You think about, some of his most memorable playoff moments, gaming and ending the Houston Rockets in the first round one year. You also look at ending Paul George and his tenure with the Los Angeles Clippers, essentially. Dame's had some awesome moments. So do you continue to go down that path and build around him, or do you build around some of those young guys? Shaedon Sharpe, who I think has unlimited potential, Anthony Simons, who's going to be a good guard in this league for quite a while. And then you also have the third overall pick to complement those young players. Do you go in that pathway, or do you build around Dame? And I think that's a really difficult question that Portland has to figure out an answer to. For me, I'm scared that they're going to lean toward the Dame pathway and trade this pick. I think that's a real mistake, to be honest with you. And I'm sure a lot of Blazers fans will agree with that. And it's not a discredit to Damian Lillard as a player. It's not a discredit to what he's done for the organization. It's just, do you choose the pathway that's best for you for the next 10 years, or do you try and push all your chips in for the next 2 seasons? And even if you do that, I think we've seen in recent history, the Suns trading for Kevin Durant, the Clippers making some big moves for Kawhi Leonard, Paul George. That doesn't guarantee you a championship. Heck, it might not even guarantee you a pathway to the conference finals. You think about the Brooklyn Nets with what they did with Kyrie, James Harden, and Kevin Durant. They never made the Eastern Conference Finals with that team. And I think that there's a lot of pressure right now in Portland to try and build some type of super team to put together stars. It doesn't necessarily mean you're going to win. In fact, right now, it almost looks like it's the opposite. If it's not an organically built team through the draft, it looks like it's going to be really, really hard to put together the pieces, especially with the new CBA. So I think Portland's at a real crossroads here on what they should do and how they should go about it. For me, I wouldn't trade the pick, but I do think it's a real possibility. So for my first trade here, of course, the Portland Trail Blazers are a team that's going to be rumored a lot with the Toronto Raptors. And this is kind of the beginning pieces that is going to construct a lot of mock trades between Portland and Toronto. And I think Pascal Siakam's really a big name to watch. He's going to be on an expiring deal, 1 year, $38 million roughly, which is very, very tough. Portland's got about $17 million in cap space this offseason if they work out a trade on the night of the NBA draft, which will give them the pathway then to bring back Jeremy Grant using bird rights. this offseason, which would be an interesting way for them to build the team. Now, Jeremy Grant, kind of a power forward. So looking at this, Siakam, does it fit really well with Jeremy Grant? That might be a question. Maybe you have to facilitate some type of sign and trade, but this is clearly about talent. Pascal Siakam, a former All NBA guy. This would be arguably one of the best, if not the best teammate that Damian Lillard has had in his tenure with the Portland Trailblazers. Of course, you could make an argument for LaMarcus Aldridge before he left for the San Antonio Spurs. CJ McCollum was obviously very great as well. But Siakam, he's proven, played in the NBA for a long time. He's had a lot of success in the NBA, including an NBA Finals run with Kawhi Leonard as his running mate back in Toronto in 2019. And I think at this point, Pascal Siakam to Portland would be a really intriguing fit on this team. Again, the big key points to me: keep Dame, keep Simons, keep Shaedon Sharpe. And you're building around that trio of players. And Pascal Siakam, a little bit younger than Dame, but still on the similar timeline that he's going to be able to impact winning as of right now. The Raptors here would get Yusuf Nurkic. This is purely to make the money work. They get two solid young players, Trendon Watford, who I think's proven a little bit more at this point of his career than Keon Johnson, who is still relatively raw. Both of these guys are pretty raw. You think about Watford as a young player, face-up four. I think the Raptors could maybe get a little bit out of him. Keon Johnson, kind of shaky as of right now, a little inconsistent, and it's hard to bank on him, getting anything from him night in, night out. But Toronto, I think they're headed toward more of a rebuild. I don't know. Masai Ujiri has kind of been reluctant to do that in his tenure as an executive. So I wouldn't really count on Portland and Toronto going into this with the idea that Toronto would be a full-on rebuild. But the one selling point here that the Blazers have, again, that this whole video centered around, is pick number 3. And that's what the Raptors would be after here, with either the intention of drafting Amen Thompson to replace Fred VanVleet, who's a free agent, or to scoop up Brandon Miller and add some really, really good shooting from behind the arc, a thing that the Raptors just, quite frankly, have not had, honestly, since Kawhi Leonard has left the Toronto Raptors. They just haven't had good perimeter shooting, and I think that's been a big flaw for this team. And I think realistically, you look at Brandon Miller as a significant upgrade into that actual department for them, that actual skill set that they just really lack at this point. But Amen Thompson does fit the bill for Masai Ujiri in terms of what he has typically looked to draft. He likes athleticism, he likes the physical traits, and I think Amen Thompson, of course, you check off all of those boxes. He's probably the quickest twitch player in the class, extremely electric with the ball in his hands, really good lateral fluidity as well. That makes me think Toronto would consider him to be the potential next point guard of the franchise. Now, I know Raptors fans are going to say, well, Scotty Barnes is our point guard, which is why, again, Brandon Miller maybe is in consideration as well. And it comes at the price of Pascal Siakam. And, it might seem like not very much coming back in for Toronto, saying, oh, we're trading an All-NBA guy and only getting 1 pick. Well, it is the 3rd overall pick, and also Siakam will be heading into a contract year. So there is a little bit of risk here for Portland acquiring Siakam, because he could walk away in free agency. My assumption is some type of extension would get done at some point with Portland. But really here, Toronto kind of reshapes their entire roster after trading Siakam, opens up things for Scotty Barnes, and then from there, Portland looks to add a win-now player next to Damian Lillard, while keeping 2 of their best young pieces in Shaedon Sharpe and Anthony Simons on the roster. Pivoting into trade number 2, again, the Blazers are our center point, and this one is with the Brooklyn Nets, and I'm sure you can assume who's going to be in this one. Mikal Bridges, of course, is the player the Blazers would be after here. Now, he's a little bit less proven when it comes to being a go-to scoring option than Pascal Siakam. Siakam's been doing it for years. Mikal Bridges has been doing it for months for the Brooklyn Nets, but it has been a very, very, very impressive couple of months for Mikal Bridges, and something that has definitely altered his perception around the league. Of course, everyone knew him as a highly valuable 3-and-D type player who can also put the ball on the deck and get to spots and score effectively and efficiently in a lesser role. I just don't know if people expected him to be willing to step into a role and excel in that way as a 27, 28 point per game scorer. But that's really what he did showcase in his couple of months with the Brooklyn Nets. And this trade package looks a little bit different than the most recent one. You think about Nasir Little here, you're not getting that big Yusuf Nurkic contract in here because Mikal Bridges' contract is significantly different, and it's a lot better of an investment here for Portland because, one, he's a little bit younger. I think he's a little bit closer to the actual timeline of Simons and Sharp, which makes him a little bit of a better fit with the young core while still being able to help out Damian Lillard in the short term. And because of that, because of those extra perks, because he's a little bit younger, friendlier contract, longer term contract, Portland does have to give up a little bit more here. Nasir Little, I think, still a semi-valuable wing in this league. Didn't have a great season this past year. Has kind of struggled with injuries throughout his career up to this point. But there's still some promise there, right? And then you also not only give up pick 3, you give up pick 23 in this draft as well, which they got for Josh Hart at the deadline. And then in addition to that, you trade 2 second-round picks out the doors because Brooklyn right now, they've been in massive asset acquisition mode. I know people are going to say, whoa, well, the Nets got offered 4 firsts from Mikal Bridges, and they said no. You have to remember those 4 firsts were from the Memphis Grizzlies or the New Orleans Pelicans. Those are not the 3rd overall selection in a really, really good draft where you're going to be able to add in a Brandon Miller. And you have to look at it and keep it in perspective that way for Brooklyn, saying, look, this isn't just for 4 first-round picks who may or may not pan out to be good players. This is for a player that a lot of people are very confident in that he will be a good player. Now, at his ceiling, maybe he's only Mikal Bridges, but if that's the case, then you're adding in extra assets alongside of him, and you're kind of reshuffling the cards here for Brooklyn, getting cheaper, which I think could be important for their management, saving quite a bit of money. You actually open up a pretty good trade exception here as well in case you want to use that in the future. They have a ton of assets that they could go back out into the marketplace to build around Brandon Miller. They have other players that are tradable like Dorian Finney-Smith, Spencer Dinwiddie. This opens the door for them. And if you're saying, well, if you're Portland, then if you think that Brandon Miller's this good, why would you even consider doing this? Because this sells to your franchise player. This sells to Damian Lillard. Look, we are doing this. We're trying to win around you. But at the end of the day, you're really still trying to keep your options open long term because you're getting a player who's kind of in the beginning of his prime, not toward the back end of his prime or anything crazy like that, which is why I like this trade quite a bit for Portland. And I do think that it does make a little bit of sense for Brooklyn. Now, if I had to guess, the Nets probably just sit on Mikal Bridges this offseason and say, yeah, we're not really going to trade him right now. But if they were to trade him, I think a top 3 pick would be kind of the asking price. And the Blazers have that to offer. Going into trade number 3 now, we look at a deal here between the Portland Trailblazers and the Minnesota Timberwolves, and this is Tim Connolly's opportunity to maybe solve some of his issues that he brought upon himself with the double center lineup that I'm just not sure if he's all in on Karl Anthony Towns like the organization was prior to his arrival. And Cat, they gave him that big Supermax contract. They locked him in, and they might be regretting that right now. And for Portland, this is a really great opportunity to take a massive step forward at a really key position of need. The use of Nurkic contract is terrible, to be honest. I knew it was the moment that they signed him. I said in a live stream that that's not going to age well, and it didn't even really last the first year very well, which is kind of a sign that it's not going to be any better in the future years, because Yusuf Nurkic is, one, overpaid now. Secondly, barely played more than Drew Eubanks this season in terms of minutes per game. And thirdly, just doesn't really give Portland the things that they need defensively. Now, Karl Anthony Towns doesn't either, but he's a significantly better offensive player. He's a better passer than Yusuf Nurkic. He's a way, way better scorer than Yusuf Nurkic. He can put the ball on the deck. He can step out behind the three-point line, of course. And for Portland, it gives them kind of that flexibility of, hey, this is a center completely different from anything that Dame's really played with since LaMarcus Aldridge left. And this gives us a different look that they can go to. Yes, it doesn't solve some of the defensive limitations, and that's a big concern. But at the same time, you're making a significant upgrade in terms of offensive talent, and it's only costing you from your current roster Yusuf Nurkic and Trendon Watford. Cat, I think Minnesota, they're not in a rush to trade Karl Anthony Towns because, one, he missed a lot of time this year. They might just look at themselves and say, hey, if he plays, we're probably just a significantly better team. And it doesn't help that the Wolves blew a whole bunch of 10-point leads this season. The Wolves could have been in line to win 50-plus games if they just took care of business and didn't lose to a whole bunch of bad teams. I think they lost to the Detroit Pistons twice, and, they just choked away games that they shouldn't have, and it was really a sign of immaturity. Karl Anthony Towns, I think a change of scenery could maybe be really good for him. Playing alongside Damian Lillard could maybe enhance his career, change the trajectory of his career as we currently see it. And for Minnesota, Jusuf Nurkic, I talked about how that's not a positive contract. For them, he would come off the bench behind Rudy Gobert. A little bit more of an understandable play style for them, kind of as a bench post scorer could work. Trendon Watford, just whatever. He's a young player that makes the salary work here, but specifically for Minnesota, maybe he could play a few minutes. The big thing for them is really getting the 2 first-round picks this year because, of course, Minnesota's in a position where they don't have tradable first. And this would be an opportunity to kind of reshuffle their team around Anthony Edwards and Rudy Gobert, which I think is the long-term goal, actually, for Minnesota, because I think Gobert gives them the things that they need defensively and offensively as a screen and roll guy and a player who puts a lot of pressure on the rim. Pivoting off of Towns into a Brandon Miller, I think would be a really, really nice move for them. And then also getting that 2023 first-round pick from the New York Knicks, I think that would be a trade asset for Tim Connolly, where he'd go back out into the marketplace and try and make another move off of this. But I think this is really the structure they're looking for. You add a wing into your core around Ant and Jaden McDaniels and Rudy Gobert and Brandon Miller, who I think would be a fantastic fit for Minnesota. And Portland gets a significant day one upgrade for, again, a player who's under 28 years old and right in the heart of his prime that could really help them advance right now further than they've been able to go up to this point. But just a reminder, I'm not under the impression that they should trade the 3rd overall pick. These are just options in case they were to really strongly explore it, which again, I'm saying I wouldn't necessarily do myself. Trade number 4, and this is fun. We have a 3-team deal, which always means it's going to be terribly difficult to project what this would look like. So you're going to have to bear with me here a little bit. This is kind of a crazy trade, okay? This is one that I struggled with putting this together. I spent a long time trying to mock this, and I don't necessarily know if I even love the way that it came out. You maybe have to give me a little bit of revision down in the comment section on this one, because I'm just not sure. But I think the direction makes sense for all of these teams. I'm just not sure if the value necessarily lines up. What happens here is the Clippers take in Chris Paul's contract. They also get Kevin Knox and Keon Johnson, which are whatever, team option, low salary, just makes the money work here. DeAndre Ayton also goes to the Clippers and becomes their starting center. And the Clippers also land the 3rd overall pick. So this team gets significantly younger, completely gives their team a facelift. Now with Chris Paul playing point guard, I think gives them some stability throughout the regular season that they just have not had. And then DeAndre Ayton, a completely different type of big than Ivica Zubac, and definitely more skilled offensively, but there's obviously some concerns about DeAndre Ayton long-term, and I think it's very likely the Phoenix Suns will not have him on the roster next season. And the Suns here, this is kind of like their sell move to get off of DeAndre Ayton, and what they do from there is add in a whole bunch of depth, because if you look at the issue on this team right now, they don't have any depth pieces. They had four guys that they trusted in their rotation. They're adding 4, maybe 5 players that they would trust going into next year, and a collection of 2nd-round picks, 3 of them coming from the Los Angeles Clippers, 2 of them coming from the Portland Trail Blazers, and then also a lottery-protected first from Portland in 2026. And the players that they would get in here, Russell Westbrook in a sign-and trade with the Clippers, which is definitely interesting. He would be teammates again with Kevin Durant. I think the way that he played in that postseason series against Phoenix would give them some willingness to acquire him. I think that point guard is a big question of concern for Phoenix long-term. Of course, Chris Paul missing more postseason time this year does not solidify that position for them long-term. And I think that Russell Westbrook might become the best option. You could look at maybe Fred VanVleet, Kyrie Irving, James Harden potentially. I don't really know if any of those are legitimate options that I could see the Suns pulling off. You never say never, but I think there's some real issues with trying to get that to work out. You also add in Nicholas Batum, Jusuf Nurkic. Again, that contract is a negative value asset in my eyes, which is why 2026 first-round lottery protected pick is involved in this deal. Then you also get Norman Powell, who'd be probably the best bench player that the Suns would have on their roster the moment that they make that trade. And then you also see Nasir Little come into the fold here as well. For Phoenix, they also saved $10 million based off of this. Not that that's a huge deal for Matt Ishbia, because he is seemingly willing to spend, but it does give them some future flexibility, just shaving off a little bit of money here in the deal. And for Portland, remember, you're trading off Nurkic, Nasir Little, Keon Johnson, and Kevin Knox. So really not a lot out of your actual long-term core. You think, okay, Nurkic, negative value contract, Nasir Little, decent player, right? But again, you're not going to lose sleep over trading him. And you're adding in Paul George. a player who I know he's missed time with injuries as well. There's some long-term concerns there, but we talked earlier about how the Portland Trailblazers just have never had a premier wing on the roster with Damian Lillard. And if you're looking for like the exact guy that would make sense with Damian Lillard, the exact guy that fits timeline with him, Paul George to me is that exact answer. I think he's a little bit of a safer player to trade for than Kawhi Leonard. I think he's easier to trade for than Kawhi Leonard, who's just a better player when healthy, but is healthy less often. Paul George to me just makes a lot of sense in Portland. Of course, you have that little Damian Lillard, Paul George beef where Dame kind of sent PG home. I still think for Portland here, like, again, I'm not trading pick 3 if I'm running the show, because I think the Clippers here kind of reset their deck in a really interesting way, give up a lot of their depth, give up some second round flexibility, trade their second best player on the roster right now in Paul George to land that asset. But I do like the way it resets the cards for them. And for Portland, I don't like this as much, which is why, again, I have concerns about the value here. But Paul George is just a significantly better player than any of the guys they give up in this deal, which is why I don't think it's completely out of the realm of possibility. It's kind of the reason I liked this pathway for them a little bit, because, again, you're making a significant upgrade to your lineup, a significant upgrade to your roster. You then at this point still have pick 23 as well. Maybe you can go draft a center in Derek Lively or Trace Jackson Davis to fill in as your starting center. Now that's a lot to rely on for a rookie big, but maybe go out and use your mid-level exception as well on that. And you could look at your lineup going into next year with some type of combination of Dame, Simons, PG, Jeremy Grant, add in a filler big man, and then you also have Shaedon Sharpe, who maybe comes off the bench, or maybe they try and find a way to fit him into the lineup. They play small, they play fast. There's a lot of options here for Portland, and I think, realistically, if you can keep Simons, keep Sharpe, you can open up your possibilities to something like this, but I just don't love trading pick 3. I really don't. And this is the only... Paul George actually really conveniently fits into that $17 million cap room slot that I talked about the Blazers having, which is why, this kind of all came together for me in this deal. Again, I don't love the value, but I don't absolutely hate it either, which is why I considered it here as the 4th trade in this series. Thank you all so much for watching. Make sure you comment down below your thoughts on those trade packages. Again, I'm not under the impression that they should trade the 3rd overall pick. I think the long-term approach is the right approach for the Portland Trailblazers. But when you do have your franchise player, maybe the best player in franchise history, telling you that he wants you to go out and make a big move, there is some of that internal pressure that can add up and ultimately force somebody to make a decision. And Joe Cronin, maybe he's going to be the guy that folds under pressure here and makes a big time move. Let me know down in the comment section below what you expect to happen with the Portland Trailblazers. Should they keep pick 3? Should they trade Damian Lillard? And just a reminder here, I will have a Damian Lillard trade video out on the channel relatively soon after this one's posted, probably a day later. So stay tuned for that. Thanks again so much for watching. Leave a like, subscribe to the channel, and we'll catch you in the very next Utility Sports video.